Um, hey everyone, my guest here today is Dr. Stephen Peters. Wait, is it Steve or Stephen? Suddenly I'm
We'll go by Steve. I'm wearing my casual shirt, and
okay. All right.
as I told you earlier, my laundry's at the floor, the chair here, so
Yeah.
it's a casual day.
Wouldn't be off to a good start getting your name wrong. So Dr. Steve Peters in his casual clothes with no laundry to be seen. And we are what are we in? I've known you what, 10 years?
At least.
At least, yeah, it's been a minute, and over the years, I've learned so much from you. I would I would say that the beginning of me knowing you and knowing your work changed my work with horses forever, and it only goes deeper and deeper. So I'm really excited about what you're going to share today. And I have a plug for your book. Hang on, we have a new book out that's really good. I don't know if it can see it. Horse Brain Science. It's excellent. Um, Everybody needs to get it after listening to this.
That's a very deep dive into the science. I knew that I needed to write a reference book that was chock full of information. When I did evidence-based horsemanship, a lot of people said, "Well, I wish it was deeper and had more citations." And
Huh.
so, yeah, you got what you asked for. Horse brain
Mhm.
science is a pretty deep reference book, and I hope it's going to be a well-thumbed book um, for a lot of people. In response to that, though, I thought people are just coming into neuroscience. What's this all about? I've heard about it. You know, I've seen AI create all these neuroscience. So everybody's a Milli Vanilli. They can fill in the.
I love that, Milli Vanilli.
So I thought, how do I make this more accessible? Well, I tried with neuropoetry on one level to reach people, but I have a book coming out in October, Horse Brain Science Simplified. I don't know if you can see that over my right
Yep,
or my left shoulder. Um, and basically, that was written so that um, it was usable and understandable, and that the science could be taken by anyone
mm,
and put to use. So that will give you your foundation. And then, well, since we're talking about books and I got a chance to plug them, the white covered book over right next to that is a book that I just finished writing, and it's going to be out in May. I wrote that with Mark Rashid and Chrissy McDonald. And what we did is we took 19 case studies, not just imagined horses, but real horses that they knew and that I knew. And we told you their story, but then I did the clinical neurological notes underneath that. So there was a book one time called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat
I read
uh,
that in school. Yeah,
by Oliver Sacks.
yeah,
And people understood neurology because he used these really interesting, fascinating case studies to introduce people to neurology. So that was the thinking largely behind this book is that we would take stories of horses that you knew and could get hooked to, and it's like a detective novel. You read about it and say, I wonder what's going on with this horse under the hood. And then I add the clinical notes
cool.
to that.
So who mistook his owner for a hat.
Yeah. So if your horse mistook you for a hat, you can find out how by reading this book.
I'll have to check that one out. Um, I have one burning question for you before we get into the main topic that I had for the day. I know this is something you grapple with being on Facebook land as somebody with a real education, but how does the public differentiate between um, Facebook popular pseudoscience versus real science and neurology?
That's an excellent question and something everybody's struggling with. You know, one of the problems sometimes is science is boring. Sometimes there's just a little chunk of information that's going to get us closer to the truth. And everybody goes, ah, well, that's interesting. But then, um, my wife died from eating pastrami sandwiches, gets like 5,000 zillion hits and goes viral, um, it's very difficult. And one of the things that I've tried to do is I've created a podcast, Skeptical Horseman. I'm going to do this with Jillian Kreinbring. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what real studies are, how you can tell pseudoscience from science, what are the myths, what gets thrown out there because it sounds good, what do we really want to believe? So we're going to believe it anyway, regardless of what truth's behind there. Uh, and we'd like it to be a guide to everybody because this is what pisses me off. Well, a lot of stuff pisses me off, but this in particular, is that science really should be for everybody and it's useful. And there's good science and there's bad science. I mean, there's some really goofy studies out there that aren't going to help anybody. And you wonder if the experimenters had ever seen a horse. And then there are studies that aren't done well. And
Yeah.
then the conclusions are not really accurate. So it's a very muddy swamp. But I think the best way to do that is let's identify good studies. Let's raise questions and then say, how would I create a good study that could actually answer that? But certainly, number of likes has very little to do with truth out there. And what harm does it do? Well, if you're inaccurate in your information, then you're likely to be inaccurate in your mindset and your approach to your horse. And I've always felt that if we if we're misreading the nervous system, then we're likely to make errors. And those errors are likely to be errors of too much pressure.
Mm.
That's always seems to be our answer for when we can't get something accomplished. So the horse ends up just showing up with a nervous system, and yet we push them into avenues based on information. And then we feel justified in punishing them. So we call them a bunch of names on top of that. Oh, it is a mess, Amy.
Yeah.
So what we try to do with Skeptical Horseman is show you where you can go and say, okay, look, go to Science Direct or go to PubMed. Here are 4 studies that were done really well, and you can hang your hat on these studies. Here are some studies that are not so good. And here are some studies that the only place they ever came from was Google University, right? And so it's an excellent question and it's a big problem. And you know, science better step up to the plate and help people to understand this because what'll happen is we'll just get ignored.
Yeah.
We just won't be seen as relevant. And that would be a shame.
I see some really goofy studies from, everything from like horses are prone to getting ulcers from country music played in the barn. I had actually read a study like that once, and it was like they're playing country music in the barn, proving that these horses all have ulcers. And it's like, well, what is their training like? What is their husbandry like? What is their feed like? Who's riding them? The country music just happens to be on,
That's
but
all irrelevant. Is it Alan
yeah.
Jackson or
Right, exactly. Are we talking like 80s country? Because if it's country today, I would get ulcers from that too. There's a lot of factors. But and then even some of the studies that go around on Facebook that are like, here's a piece of a dissected horse, and this absolutely proves without a shadow of a doubt that this riding philosophy is true or untrue. And it's like you're using a piece of a horse, not the whole body of a horse, in motion alive, and who's riding it, and like you're leveraging the horse's head and neck as a piece of dead horse in a way that you would never do with your hand in the rain. So there's a lot of pieces to a good study.
Yeah. And whenever you hear language, this proves it.
Mm-hmm.
Right away, that should be a red flag
Mm.
because good scientists don't hang their self-identity on being right.
Ooh, I'm gonna write that one down.
Yeah, we don't hang our self-identity on being right. In fact, when we're wrong, that actually excites us because we say, oh, wow, look, we were able to show that this didn't happen. Good scientists don't need to be right. They just want to get closer to the truth. And that's always changing, always evolving. Being a good scientist, what you really realize is just all the stuff we don't know.
I love that. Yeah, that's really rare on Facebook, isn't it? Everybody knows everything.
Sometimes the loudest person is the person you really might not want to be listening to
Yeah,
because we're not that confident. There's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you ever heard of it?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah, so that the people that know the less, as they start to know some information, right? And it's funny because I'll see AI will create somebody's post that's taken from a little bit of science, and then somebody will copy them, and their AI will copy their AI, and pretty soon you've got copies of the copiers who copied. And so, how much is mixed in all that crazy mess?
Yeah.
Anyway, I got myself so worked up I lost my train of thought.
Well, the public certainly has to be very discerning right now, which if we're unable to tell if a AI video of like rabbits jumping on a trampoline is AI or not, we're in for a world of hurt with
Right.
reality and truth.
Right. And I notice in my horse brain science clinics, the first day when we have a question and answer, where people say, Dr. Peters, because the horse has 400 million more mirror neurons than
Mm.
humans, where'd you get that information from?
I
Well,
remember that post. Yeah.
yeah, well, that was on Facebook. And then you realize that the person on Facebook will say this was heavily researched, so I'll research it. So I go looking, and it's research because they found it on somebody else's Facebook site.
Yeah.
And then they'll find that there's an article might have been written by a journalist. So the journalist has written it. So when you look at what his sources are, who wrote the article, you found out that it's from the Facebook post. So it's this goofy, crazy circle. So when people say it's heavily researched, well, show me the citations. Show
Mhm.
me where it's peer-reviewed science. What that means is that the burden for scientists is to for them, the scientists themselves, to show you why their information is correct. And then they put that out there for their peers to hammer away at. And believe me, they hammer away at it. Oh, you should have done this. You should have done that. How come you didn't do this statistical package? So it's a gauntlet that you run through to get something published. With pseudoscience, the burden of proof is on you. So the person just says it, and now you have to prove if it's right or wrong. That's not science, that's ass backwards.
Mm.
And so that's one way. And then look at and see who benefits from that information. Oftentimes it's selling something. And then, oh, Sherry King, who I think is fantastic. She's always looking at this. She calls it the bologna sandwich,
Yeah.
where somebody takes kernels of science that sound good, and then what they do is then they wrap in a bunch of bologna. So, for example, if somebody said, Dr. Peters, you talked about there's a new product. You talked about evoked potentials in the horse's brain. They exist, right? Well, yeah. Well, you talked about how synapses work in the horse's brain, right? Right. Well, I just found out there's a new product called the nanometer, and I just sat in bed and pushed the button, and it looks at the evoked potentials of my horse, and it looks at the synapses in the person, and they can just do it from a distance, and it's just like what you said. No, it's not just like what I said. That's a bologna sandwich, right? Don't go by nanometers, right? Um, but getting back to things like the 400 more times mirror neurons in horses and humans, there is no scientific study yet that has shown that horses have mirror neurons. There's primate studies. There are things that indicate that they might. There's also no evidence that from, 5,000 feet, a horse can sense our heartbeats. right? So, but these things, we want to believe them so much, and they sound so cool.
Mm.
And that we are trying. There's new wearable technology, there's new imaging. So there are a lot of questions that haven't been answered that emerging research is trying to answer, but oftentimes it's almost as if all these questions have been answered. And Dr. Peters, you're supposed to be a neuroscientist and you don't know about this special cream from Brazil that's made from, poison frogs that you rub it on your hair. And no, I don't know that stuff. Right? It is, and I don't blame people. I don't mean to make fun because I'm a scientist and it's difficult to weed through all of this. So what I hope we'll do together in my Skeptical Horseman podcast is it's not made to say, hey, we know this and you don't know this. It's made for let's take a look at what's out there and let's look at what's good science and what's bad science and what do you think this is that we're looking at? And what are your biases? I always ask that. I have a bunch of them,
Mm.
right? And I have to catch myself saying, oh, look, I wanted to follow that study, but here's 4 studies that prove something different.
Mm.
So we all have to recognize our biases. And if we don't, we're going to really have a small world, a personal small world, because we're not willing to deal with our cognitive dissonance. We're not willing to say, hey, I have a confirmation bias. I believe everything that says coffee is good to drink, and every time a study comes along and tells me it's bad, I say that's a faulty study.
That's
Well,
what
that's
I
a
say.
bias. That's
Yeah.
that's exactly what I say. I recognize my biases.
Yeah, well, I think the what you said was hanging your identity on beliefs not
Mm,
being right. I think that's a big problem for us as an uneducated public. And I'll put myself in that. I'm like, I don't have any scientific education. And so it's very easy to identify yourself in aligned views. And so anything that confirms that is going to stay on the scaffolding, and anything that doesn't confirm that is going to get rejected. So we have to be really careful not to have an identity wrapped up in the truth,
mm.
which is near impossible, probably. Very,
It
very
is.
hard. Yeah,
It is. But we can get better at critical thinking for
for
sure.
sure. Yeah. Because except for the coffee one,
Mm,
that one's not going
right.
anywhere. So let's talk about motivation because um I'm sure you experience this a lot, and I see it a lot teaching is people don't know what motivation is, how to motivate their horse. Um so let's just talk about that. Let's start there. What is motivation?
Yeah. So motivation is just being compelled to do an act that you expect is going to reward you in some way. So what we learn is that and more research indicates this, that brains are more predictive organs than they are thinking organs. So if our horse predicts that something good will come out of an action, be it a release, be it relief, be it, you know, a chance to catch their breath, whatever it is, if they believe something good will come out of an action, then that is becomes part of their prediction. And motivation is no problem if they're curious, they're exploring, and their predictions are this is going to turn out to be good for me. If it turns out not to be so good, if it turns out that our timing's not good, or that they get confused, and then we punish confusion, that doing what we ask are, we're not giving them relief or release at the right time. So they get confused and they get punished for that. So they start to predict this is not going to be good right off the bat. So why would they want to join you in what you're asking them to do if their prediction is such that, and especially if the prediction comes true, then it gets wired in their brain. This sucks. There's a scientific term for you.
The
I'm wearing my
percentage
casual
of
shirt today.
suckage is increased.
Yeah. So what we want to do is set it up, don't make 35 left turns in a row, right? After the third one, turn right. Just that little bit of a change is what we call reward prediction error. Now, that may sound technical, but it's very simple. It just means that what the horse expected they were going to get, they didn't get, and the expectation was better than they expected, right? If the expectation is worse than they expected, then you're going to see they're not getting dopamine. They're going to start thrashing their tail. They're going to get irritated. That's not going to be fun for you or the horse. But if we can keep them in such an environment where they have some agency. What I mean by agency, and this gets misused as well, agency basically for welfare purposes is the horse gets a choice. This does not mean the horse gets to do whatever they want. It just means that the horse learns that their behavior has meaning,
Mm.
right? So that if you ask for something and they give you what you're asking for, you give them relief or release or something positive, then that reward expectation is that's good. So we're not going to have a motivation problem if we're really good at delivering the goods that we promise.
That's a really good point you made about agency because I think some of the most disturbed horses I've ever met, the most frustrated horses I've ever met, were ones where the owners, with good intentions, meant to let the horse have a choice. And the horse essentially said no for everything, and the owner would back off. And that would lead to a horse who lacked motivation for everything and was very grumpy, resistant, and almost resentful upon being asked to do anything. So
Yeah,
once we're at
go
that
ahead.
stage,
I'm
what do
sorry.
we do?
Yeah, we have to be careful in how we lay this out in the environment because once a brain finds out something works, why would it ever want to change its mind?
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, yeah, this works.
Yeah.
Hey, person, I'm telling you, this works. You pick up my back foot, and it's no longer that I feel threatened, but if I just kick it a couple times, you let go. So now I it doesn't matter if the farrier's coming, it doesn't matter if I'm upset. I could be eating grain. I'm still going to kick you because that works. So when those things become automatic because they work, then that's almost a rewiring type of exercise. We've got to go back now.
Mm.
So we need to be very careful in how we wire those things in because they'll get passed to areas of the brain that treat them as habits. So they'll get passed to areas of the brain that treat them as habits. And then the horse will blame the horse, will call the horse names, etc. We'll fight with the nervous system when really what we need to do is go back and say, you know what? I need to create a better pathway, a better habit. So oftentimes when horses are telling, we think they're saying, hey, buzz off, forget you. I'm not going to do it. It's not because the horse has a personality disorder. It's not because the the horse is defiant or the horse is stubborn or lazy or all the other things. It's because we have predicted to them, we have caused their predictions, their expectations to be that this is not going to be good, or we've set in a pattern that's already set and wired, and now we're fighting with the nervous system to try to get them to do something else. Um, there are a number of factors. And so instead of maybe asking that question, how do I get more out of my horse? Maybe we ask the question, what caused this horse's motivation to shut down? Because then we'll be working with the nervous system. And if we've got a shutdown horse, the last thing we want to do is increase the demand. The last thing we want to do is use heavy force because we've already convinced that horse. That horse already has predictions that my behaviors don't matter. No amount of searching, no amount of answering, no amount of effort is going to get me out of this. So I'm just checking out for now. And we get that horse, and our task isn't how do we get more out of this horse? It's how do we convince them to come out and get realigned with us, come out and participate in the world. So we've got to go back to very beginnings and look closely for when is that horse starting to orient again? And when is that horse paying attention? And can that horse, if they lose their attention, bring it back to me? And can I create some curiosity? So we have to really start looking for all the little avenues we can use to reconnect with that nervous system that's checked out on us. If a nervous system hits the off switch, it doesn't do us any good to beat on them, yell on them, uh, get after them. And if they just for a moment come out of their shell and we decide we're going to add more pressure, we're actually just going to convince them that they just need to get back in their shell again.
Yeah.
So what we're doing in that case, instead of rehabbing the nervous system, we're just rehearsing more shutdown by putting more demand on, right? There's something called, everybody's heard of homeostasis, or most people have. It's just that level where everything's normal. Your heart rate's normal, your breathing's normal, your blood pressure's normal. And so people talk about getting my horse to rest and go back to homeostasis. But the horse isn't always at homeostasis. The world isn't all rest. If the horse wants to do something, if you want your horse to get motivated to do something, that calls for something called allostasis, ALLO stasis. Allostasis is what changes have to happen in the nervous system to do what this person's demanding of me. And so, it's like us. If we go to the diving board, we have to all of a sudden, get ourselves ready, and our nervous system needs to get ready to do what we need to do. So if the horse is going to jump, if the horse is going to, no matter what discipline you're in, what we're asking and demanding of the horse creates an allostatic response. The nervous system is going to respond. What we have to do is be able to reward that horse for giving us that effort. And oftentimes that's okay, now you can come back down and you can lick and chew and or here's your release.
That actually
And
reminds me of a lot of horses that I've met who, similar to the last ones, where their owners are really well intentioned in trying to take good care of their horse through a misunderstanding of this, where they actually keep everything so relaxed and don't let the horses get any bit of even energy to where well, what I do requires forward movement. So if you ask these horses to go forward, let's say into a walk, and then like out of a little doddering walk into a more brisk walk, they completely come apart emotionally. And a lot of times the owners use that as evidence that this work scares my horse. We can't do it. Where like we have to live in our, I always call it in my pajamas. We have to be in our pajamas in bed, or we can't cope with the world. We have to be completely relaxed. So how do we help those kind of horses deal with a little bit more of life's energies
right. You're
without
you're
coming apart?
not doing your horse or yourself any favor by living in a world that's this big,
Mm.
right? So what you need to do is this thing called pendulation. What you do is you challenge your horse. How do you know you went too far? Well, if they, go to fight or flight, sometimes you go too far to find out they went too far. So then you let them come back down. But allowing them to reset their nervous system tells them that, okay, there's something on the other side here. And if we get to that point where they're challenged, they actually have the most um, norepinephrine, a neurochemical, on board. If I get too much, I'm going to go too far. But if I have a certain amount, I get the largest amount of acetylcholine. And acetylcholine allows me to focus my attention. And I know that I'm getting a little uh, too technical here, but bear with me. If you have that level of challenge, that level of arousal, that level of attention, you get your biggest dopamine hit.
Mm.
So your horse starts to say, I want to be challenged. I want to be challenged because that's where the big dopamine is. If we keep our horse within this little range, okay, turn left, turn left, turn left, maybe about the fourth time, their reward prediction error is saying, I'm not going to get anything out of this. And pretty soon there's no dopamine. And then they get irritated and they get aggravated because and any little thing that arouses them, their nervous system is totally unprepared for. But if we do pendulation, if we let them get challenged and come back down and consolidate that information. So we got to give them a little space and time to do this. It's not like you do this all in one afternoon. So over time, we continue to look for ways to challenge our horse and bring them back down. After a while, it becomes very hard to get those horses to really panic. And those are horses that actually want to do things with you because you found the pot of gold, you found the dopamine, and their world is this big. And so even when they're presented with things they've never seen before, they're so curious and willing to explore that because of the environment we've created for them. They become our super learners. What happens if you take a kid and you never let him out of the house? And in fact, you never let him out of his room. And in fact, you hardly ever let him out of the closet.
Just like where my son is right now, locked in the closet.
The box stall.
That's right.
And you never let them out of there, and there's no interaction with the world, then what we do is we create brains and nervous systems that can't cope with the world. And so that horse is dangerous because even a normal situation, their nervous system has no experience in a new situation and they come apart.
Mm.
So for those people that believe they're doing right by their horse, oh, my horse got a little aroused. Arousal's what we need. Arousal's what makes us play. Arousal's what gets us passionate about things. Arousal's what happens when we're learning at our best. And so we want arousal. If we didn't have arousal and we just sat on the couch eating potato chips all the time and never interacted at all, well, our brains would shrink. They
Yeah.
would shrink.
I always tell people in lessons when they're, or like at a clinic scenario when their horse is a little anxious and they have more energy to use that energy to get them focused, instead of being afraid of the energy or trying to shut it down or trying to stop everything, is you can actually use that energy very productively in a way that helps calm the horse really well.
On the other end of the spectrum, there's something called allostatic load. So you have to get your nervous system up and ready to do something. But let's say our horse does that, and then we demand something else.
Mm.
So that takes even greater allostatic response. And then we're going to demand something else. If we don't allow the nervous system to reset, we're going to accumulate those demands. We're going to exceed the allostatic load. And what happens then? That's where we're calling a horse names for not having motivation
Mm.
because there aren't enough resources left to to be curious, to be exploratory. Actually, the load is so large that just coping in whatever way they can becomes part of their nervous system.
Those
So
would
we
be the
can't get
horses we
that
would
horse
call.
motivated to do anything because just staying alive is where their resource level is at.
Would it be accurate to describe horses like that? The ones where they're perceived as being lazy when they're really just so overwhelmed and overloaded that they have no forward going. They can't do anything extra except cope, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we even mistake stillness for wellness.
Mm.
And that's a big problem sometimes too. Uh, your horse could actually, here would be an example. If we get our horse and able to do something, and we say, great, but our horse can't recover from that. They stay hyper alert, they stay aroused, they can't find a way back down again. They did what we asked, but they're really struggling to bring their nervous system back down to some sort of regulation. That's a sign that even if our horse can do something, if they can't recover, we're asking too much.
Mm.
Even if they did it, we're probably asking too much of that nervous system. Somewhere down the line, the wheels are going to come off. So it's back and forth. It's here's your challenge. Let me see if you can recover. Let me see how quickly you can get back to normal. You know, if you put your horse on the trailer and they're a little excited on the trailer and you hear them stomping around and but then they calm down and then they get off the trailer just fine, right? So that horse is able to self-regulate and find its way back down. But the horse that gets on and stomping around and that continues to escalate, then probably we're asking too much of that nervous system, and we got to do some work on getting comfortable with the trailer. So using the outcome of, well, they did it is not always a good measure if if we're dealing with the nervous system because it's like a banker. It's going to reach a cost. You can't just keep withdrawing, 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 withdrawing. You'll just go bankrupt. But if you let compound interest, if you let the horse do something and then they come back down and they're comfortable with it and they dwell on it, and that's something else I probably should talk about just a little bit. This whole dwell thing, I get asked about this all the time, and that's just a pause or a break between learning episodes. What happens in your brain when you're first exposed to something? You need attention. That's part one. You got to have the horse's attention to be with you, to be focused on what it is that you're trying to show them. So if you have that attention, information gets encoded, but you don't quite have it. What you need to do is consolidate that information. And what happens is areas of your brain called the hippocampus, that's your memory center, about even with your ears. What we know from functional MRI is that that hippocampus will replay what you just learned. Now you've consolidated the information. It's like you, when you learn something, you sleep on it, the next day, it's likely that you have that information more solidly in your brain
We have
because you
to be
had,
really careful we don't let the green goblin take over us of the just do it one more time and one more time and one more time.
right. Because when the hippocampus is trying to process that information, we're asking the brain to process more information. So it's competing
Mm.
with what's already there. So actually and then if our horse gets fatigued, if our horse gets irritated, each progression is going to get a lower dopamine hit. So now your horse is actually, if they're going to put that in memory, are going to remember that as that drilling sucked. You know, that's what I associate with what happened. So if you've got it and you're sure you've got it, and then you do it again, and you think, okay, I think my horse has it. Let me just back off. I'm finding that this pause has a number of elements because I'll always have an engineer in my class who says, well, how long do I wait? Like 1.5 seconds, or is that like 1.75 minutes that I allow my horse to rest? The first part is just a quiet phase. One, you're just not going to bring any more information into for the horse to have to process. Then what you're going to look for is some evidence that your horse is settling. That could be muscle tone. That could be their head starts to come down. the famous licking and chewing, eye blink, all that sort of stuff, telling you that, yeah, my horse is in this pause is starting to settle. Um, and those are components that you're looking for. And you're also looking for an agency component where your horse can find its safe spot, know that you're not going to provide any more information that will interfere. And what Martin Black calls, I put them in a place where they start to go inside and internalize what I'm doing, not just follow me motorically where I see it on the outside, but I'm trying to put them in a place where I know that what I've taught is getting internalized. And people say, well, then I'll just go walk or I'll come up to my horse. That a boy, good job. That all interferes with trying to consolidate the information. Let the brain do its work, even if you're walking with your horse, right? After they've learned something that's challenging, I would recommend just turning them out in pasture with the other horses and let them just be gone. Their brains will replay this while they're out grazing and and such. Yeah, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. Um,
I get that all the time where, I'm doing a lesson and the horse has this big breakthrough with something that was really difficult. Like the thing they called me out for that was not working at all. We break down the pieces, the thing that they wanted happens, and they're like, oh, I'm so happy. Now let's do it again. Or let me show you what we already do. Or let me show you, like, I want to show you what we usually, or our little routine. Or let's do like the flying change now. And it's really hard at that point to be like, calm your pants, take a breath. He's done. We're done.
I know what I wanted to say
Yeah.
was basically even walking is not neurologically silent. If you just think about it, you're still on your horse. They're still aware of you. They've still got to balance you on there, so their brain's doing those types of things. If you're wearing spurs, they know you're wearing spurs. If if they've got to think about, well, what signal am I going to get next? Are they going to let me walk for 5 feet? Are we going to make a transition change? So all this is still competing with the information. So if you have new information and you think your horse has that information, let get out of the brain's way and let the brain go to work. You cannot do it as well, even if you think you can. Because if you do it again and again, you'll create fatigue. You do it again and again, and you'll get that reward prediction error. Now, let's say we've created you know, I'm not totally convinced that everything that's called a trauma is actually a trauma. I don't mean that in a negative way. Um, but certainly there can be learned fear responses. And what we're finding, this is brand new, is that there are dopamine neurons actually in the amygdala. So the amygdala is a structure that's related to fear. So whenever you hear talk about the horse being afraid or having a post-traumatic stress disorder, etc., it's because the amygdala has been supercharged and now that's in memory. What we are finding is that if you can fire the dopamine neurons and dopamine related to pleasure, etc., learning, you can actually modify the response of the amygdala. What does that mean? Well, let's look at it in layman's terms. If we can get our horse curious, if we can get our horse exploring, they're not going to forget the bad thing that happened to them. That may never be erased, but they won't have the fear response and the same emotional reaction and defensive response if we can find a way to create something interesting in their life, to explore, to have agency, to not feel like this happened to me because the world did this to me. And they don't think it that way, but basically, that's why people have learned helplessness. They think the world's doing this and I have no control, but to just be able to create enough control so that horses will have some curiosity, will orient to us, will fire those neurons, those dopamine neurons in the amygdala, and actually start to dampen that fear reaction. So they'll still remember what happened, but they won't have to respond in such a huge way. So once again, all these things we're talking about, motivation and fear and and having our horses do what we want them to do, we want to do that in partnership and in synchrony because they're built that way to work with us. I mean, if you watch their footfall with, you know, large groups of horses that are turned out, it's not like they're saying, "Okay, everybody turn left now." You know, it's built in. You know, watch foals when they just connect with their mom. So they feel good. They have a lot of serotonin when they're in synchrony.
Well, that's something we're going to talk about a lot together when we do our clinic
Um,
is how moving rhythmically and getting in sync with the horse really helps calm them and make them feel more trusting. Which shameless plug, that clinic is what, August?
yeah, so what Amy's talking about, we're going to do a clinic in Chapel Hill at Ardenwood Farm. And that's going to be in August, the 20th through the 23rd, 4 days. And
Glad you came prepared because I was just about to go scroll through my phone.
yeah, and you know, as Amy said earlier, we've known each other for about 10 years. And um, I've, and Amy, you know, she's always so self-deprecating that, that, you know, she said, well, I don't have this science background. What I watch Amy do with horses shows me that she's so well aware of what's going on in the horse's nervous system. You don't have to have big words to know what's going on, you know, and her work with horses has always impressed me. So I know horses are going to get the benefit of the doubt and their nervous systems are going to be worked with in ways that can optimize their learning and their welfare. I'm so excited to get a chance to collaborate with Amy, and we're going to set this up so that Amy's going to be doing some horse work with people. Um, I think our horse spots are all filled.
I think so, yeah. Well, what I've learned from you, like I said, has been really life-changing. And I know I've called you a million times when I have a horse that I don't understand and be like, what do I do with this one, Steve? So you've been a huge resource for me. So I really, really have appreciated that.
Yeah, so I think if you contact Rose George, there's still some spots left, and I have her email here, rosem0303 at yahoo.com.
Yeah, I'll put that in the caption on the video too.
You
I'll
can
put it.
also go to my website, horsebrainscience.info, and look under events, and it'll be posted there with all the information about the clinic. Um,
Yeah, I think it's under mine too, under the events page as well.
Great.
It's going to be a really fun one. The last one we did was really fun, but I think this one's going to be even cooler.
Yeah, we did one previously, and I think really what we were able to do is lay a good foundation with this is what the nervous system's all about, and then actually apply that and watch that in real time. Watch these changes in the nervous system, watch these neurochemical changes in the horse. So we start to get a look at what that looks like. And then if you have a number of different horses, you actually can see that across a spectrum. And we're also going to have riders, and that's important because we so focus on the horse that we forget that 50% of that equation is the nervous system we bring to the equation. So when you interact with your horse, you know, you're bringing movement, your voice, the way that you come across to that horse. And the horse could be different that particular day. So there's always this back and forth dialogue between nervous systems, and that's fascinating uh, to figure out. If you didn't like that part of horsemanship, you can always go to the carousel or put a quarter in those machines. But the living creatures are actually going to have variance in where their nervous systems are at. There's going to be windy days. There's going to be days where a horse is sore. There's going to be days where you're pissed off. There's going to be days that you're afraid. And being aware of that and what you bring to the equation, and some of that we're going to talk about in our clinic, but we're going to see different nervous systems and different horses and how they interact. So I think what we've been able to create, Amy and I, for our audience is that opportunity to really get a look from all angles.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. And I have more of a movement focus just because that's what I've studied. And so it'll be really fun to integrate the two of them together and see how the horse's brain responds to and through movement.
That's really fascinating because that's so primitive in us too, rhythm and movement. And we know that when horses are moving together in a herd, that's when there's large amounts of oxytocin, a trust bonding uh, neurochemical, but also serotonin. It gives them emotional balance. So if you think about this, if I'm riding in sync with my horse and I'm not getting in the way, but moving with my horse, then each of us is going to have a higher serotonin level. My horse is going to feel emotionally better, emotionally safer because I'm in tune. If you don't believe me, try to balance with your reins. Throw your horse off balance and
Mhm.
see how upsetting that is to a nervous system. And yet, watch people who are really good. It's almost telepathic. You don't really know where their signals are coming from just because they're in sync with their horse. Uh, it's amazing. And that comes standard on all models.
Yeah. Well, that's what I always tell people is like you can train a horse to do anything through repetitive response and release. But if you actually ride in the motion of the horse is just there and they're very calm and they're very energetic at the same time. And the cool thing is for riders, learning to move with their horse in the horse's movement calms the rider too because they feel safer, they feel more relaxed, they feel more fluid. And that stilted, fearful movement of a lot of riders can be sort of melted away when they integrate into the horse's movement because they actually are safer. Your brain gets that feeling of being in sync versus at the mercy, the victim of the horse's movement, and it just brings everybody together, and it calms both horse and rider down so beautifully that I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and it's so obvious
Yeah,
when you start to look for it.
yeah. Yeah, it's like you said earlier, like the difference between getting the task done versus feeling good doing. You use the analogy of the trailer. The horse got in the trailer, but it isn't quite success if the horse doesn't feel good doing it. And that's how I feel about movement, is the horse can be trained to an action very easily. You can use any number of methods to get a horse to take a canter transition, for example. But if the rider and the horse are gelling together and moving into the canter together, that's a totally different experience for both. So,
Th- I believe that's a higher level of horsemanship when you are in sync with your horse's nervous system
mm,
because you're not speaking a language, although that's where we often start out. But the language you're speaking is sensory. It's a nervous system language. And the more you understand their nervous system and the impact and influence of your nervous system, if you don't believe me, just purposely march out in the pasture one day and try catching your horse.
Yeah.
You know, your horse is looking for consistency, predictability. If their brains are predictive models, they want to predict consistency, they want to predict safety. They want to, and if we're able to set that up so that our movement and our voice and everything about us is congruent, then we become predictable. If we're predictable, we become readable. If we're readable, we're safe. And then we can get in that protective bubble. But if we're out of sync, if we let our emotions take over, believe me, horses read that. Go look at the study of Clever Hans. Clever Hans wasn't doing algebra problems. Clever Hans was reading. What was he reading? Micro movements and breath and everything in the professor who was giving him the problems, right?
Such a
Reading
cool
everything.
story.
If you know that your horse can read you like that, and you can be transparent in what you project, you know, then you can hold this dialogue. Just think of dancers, right? If Amy's talking about movement and rhythm, etc., you know, you can have that dance partner who manhandles. I'm in charge here. You know, you will follow my lead, right? And you get yanked all over the place. That's one way of dancing. Another way is you have no rhythm and timing, and then you're stepping on your partner's feet all the time, and that doesn't look so great.
Mm.
But that you can recover from that. But there's actually that part where there's a dialogue, not through speech, but through movement that has a flow to it, a different kind of language, and it looks beautiful. And you don't really know who's saying what to whom, yet that's where the beauty lies. And I think if you've ever ridden a horse and gotten into that kind of communication, right? Where you're not in the way, where you're not bringing up fear, where you're not making the horse do things, where you're not manhandling, or where you're not making any requests at all. So some of the writers are like that, where they're like the dance partner that I don't know what to do. Do you just, you know, and if we're not making any communication at all, that's all confusing to our horse. If we aren't communicating to our horse, then our horse gets confused. And then if they get confused, they get sympathetically aroused. That is threatening to them. Confusion is not a pleasant place for them to be. So we want to be clear. If we
Mhm.
can be clear in our communication, not muddy, clear in our communication, then that becomes predictable and our horses will follow it. And then we have this wonderful dialogue. And if you look at it from that perspective, from that angle, that really what we're talking about is nervous systems. Uh, it is so much more ethical and humane, and uh, our horses can then really come out and show us just what they're capable of. Every horse is capable of truly tremendous things. Oftentimes, if we get out of the way and and we guide and we direct and we communicate. So I'm not talking about, you know, I've had people tell me, how about the horses that say no, that they don't want to work that day? So give me an example. Well, you know, we're at this equine assisted therapy place, and we have like 8 horses out there in the pasture, and these 7 almost always say no. But here's this one poor horse that has such allostatic load because it always says yes. Well, it's learned to endure, it's learned to tolerate. And what we've done is not guided horses, not worked with them and directed horses. We've simply allowed that brain to say what works. Well, what works is they open up the pasture gate and we just walk to the back of the pasture. And then they walk towards us and we walk over here. So that's been wired in there. It's not that it's so terribly unpleasant to be caught, but now it's just such a habit that we've got to go back and rewire. And if we use that anthropomorphic stuff of they're saying, well, I'm really not feeling like going to work today. Um, that's not exactly how their brain is processing the
That form a
information
union.
through. What's that?
He's forming a union as we speak.
Yeah. We'll never listen to that damn guy again.
You know, your analogy of dancing reminded me when I was growing up in South America, everybody danced salsa, and I didn't know how to dance salsa because, you know, I'm a white girl. And so I danced with various guys, and I just sucked. And I'm feeling pretty bad about myself because wasn't born with this salsa movement, you know. I'm trying everything to figure out like how do you move this part of you and not that part of you, and it's fast, you know. And then I remember dancing with this one guy who was not very attractive, but such a good leader in dancing. And a couple minutes into the dance, I'm like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this. I started to feel really confident. And then toward the end of the dance, I'm like, this guy's pretty good looking.
That serotonin does wonders.
Exactly. And that reminds me of like at the end of a ride when you make a horse feel really good, you know, you bring out their athleticism, you bring out their mobility, you bring out their natural gifts by leading really well without taking over. They look at you at the end and they're like, "You're pretty good looking." And
And all Amy's horses can salsa so well.
then- yeah, I mean it's like it's such a fine balance because you can't be mamby-pamby in your leadership. Like if somebody danced with me and didn't lead enough, I wouldn't know what to do. But if they
Right.
take over, I'm going to be really aggravated. You know, don't pull me around. And so there has to be that perfect sweet spot where you're leading with a good intention, a good feeling, but you're only leading by like one fraction of a hair of a second ahead. So it's imperceptible and you don't even know where you're going to go, but you know you're going to get there. It's hard to explain, but it's such a cool feeling that we can give where the horse just kind of melts away resistances, not by being hammered.
Right. Yeah. Are we going to run roughshod over them and make them, or are we going to find little doors to open that they'll seek out, that they'll start to gravitate toward, and then that's we let them lead themselves, but
Yeah.
we set it up for them to be able to do that. And then what's even more fascinating is every nervous system is as unique as a snowflake
Mm.
and a lot of prior experience. So the one phrase in horsemanship that I take issue with is the horse is lives in the now.
Mm.
If that were the truth, then that horse who had a saddle go under them, a horse that had been abused, they would be a blank slate that day that you work with them. But what they bring is the wiring that's been put in previously. So you need to work with your horse to understand what that wiring is and then move into the future. But understanding what's causing your horse to react, respond, be how they are in the moment comes from everything that's happened to them up until that point. And sometimes you inherit that and you have no idea what that is. And they all have different nervous systems. So what we're talking about in that dance is, yeah, some of them will be dancing with army boots and other ones with ballet slippers. And you kind of have to figure out where that is. And that's actually to me the joy of working with living creatures
Mhm.
is they're all individual and they're all have different ways of perceiving the world. And if I can appreciate the world that they perceive and then create an environment that optimizes learning, that makes helps them to feel safe, that that actually they'll trust me when I do make challenges uh, to them, that is just the wonder of the world.
Yeah, it's such a challenge to understand the theory, to learn the science, to study the technicalities of horsemanship and riding, and then to get out into the horse's sensory world and interact with a sensory creature in a flow that isn't stilted or, because the horses don't read these books or listen to these podcasts,
Right,
and that's like you said, they're all so individual and unique. Um, but they all do have the same structuring.
right.
Just like us, you and I are completely different, but we still have the same skeletal structure. We still have the same brain. We still have the same basic makeup, but what motivates you and what motivates me, I'm guessing, are very different.
Mhm.
Because for me, I only respond to beatings. So that's the only way I can be made to behave. Threats and beatings, obviously.
Ah, ah,
Yeah,
w- well, our hour slipped by pretty quick.
I know. And I'm already thinking of a million other topics we could talk about next time.
Well, let's make a next time.
I'd love it.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, let's find ourselves a topic and see where it takes us. And that I really appreciated this too, is that we've kind of had our own flow of where we've gone with this, but I think we've painted enough images for people to have a sense of what we're talking about. Um, and if you really need to see it in real life, in real time, well, come to our clinic in August.
Yeah, that's going to be really fun. And don't forget to get Steve's book, which is it's your second book, correct? Outside the other two behind your ear.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's evidence-based horsemanship, then the book of neuropoetry.
Oh, third. Yeah, you have three books.
Yeah, and I did this one.
Yeah.
And then be on the lookout for the one with Mark and Chrissy.
Yeah.
It should be out in May.
Very cool. You've got a big year coming up. And you're going all over the world. You're big.
Ah,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
We are. And this is also to me very encouraging that last year I went to the Spanish riding school.
Yeah,
And so
that
here's a bastion of tradition, 450 years of tradition. But they were really interested in learning about the horse's nervous system.
that's amazing.
And this year, I'm going to a number of veterinary clinics, one veterinary clinic hospital, where they have a sleep lab for horses with equipment designed to look at when they go into REM sleep.
Wow.
We're going to do some dissections. And so I'm going to another group of veterinarians in Vienna. So the fact that veterinarians and clinics and equine hospitals are also wanting to have a deeper dive into what goes on in that structure. I mean, we learn about the architecture of the structure, and you can point to certain areas, but how they're wired, how they're interacting, what the neurochemical mix is, what that means in terms of behavior. I tell everyone the neurological state of the horse is the first place that you're going to get a hint of anything. Behavior is down the line.
Mm.
Behavior is way down the line. But the neurological state, the nervous system state, is where everything is bubbling and getting ready to happen. So understanding what that cocktail, what that mix, what's going on there puts us so much farther ahead before something happens way, way down the line. Behavior and trust and all those things happen after uh, nervous system state. And I think the the horse world is really grasping onto this fact because it's better for horses.
Well, that's very encouraging and very cool. Well, Steve,
And
thank
I'm off my soapbox for the moment.
you. Well, thank you for your time. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I've got a bunch of notes of stuff that I want to talk about next time. So we'll get together and find it next time.
And Amy, you are bringing your new book to the clinic,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
that'll be available for signing.
My book is just a collection of stories and poetry, so it's not gonna give you a science degree like yours.
Not just,
Well, it
not
is.
just. I've read all of Amy's books, and what I can say is this latest one is truly in her voice. I can find Amy in that book, and uh, it is it is a strap yourself in adventure. story as well as poetry. So I'd pick up a copy of Amy's book as well.
Well, thank you. Now I don't know what to do with my hands. Awkward. Well, it was great talking to you. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will be catching up with you soon.
All right, we'll see you soon, Amy.
Okay, bye, Steve.
Take care.